Okay, so one way that you can open the editor is that you can have that bar over here. All right, going here. Is that you can write edit, and then for example, discussion section 2.m, capital VS. And if you enter, it's gonna say that the file doesn't exist. Do you want to create it? And yes, and then you have that open up in the editor. Or you can right click here, and then there's a new, you can have a script. You can have function, live script, class example, test class, everything. So today we are going to talk about functions. So let me get started by talking about why we need functions. First of all, there are like the resetting command that I usually ask students to do. So we have the close all, we have clear variables, and CLC. So if you remember, we talked about these two commands, like CLC, clear the command window, and clear variables, like clear the workspace for you. But for the close all, it's for the case that you have a plot. You want to close the plot and then have like new figures and stuff like that. So this is like the resetting comments. I want to comment it here, resetting. All right, so for like grading your homeworks and stuff like that, and usually for the SQS, we have that here because it's just going to reset everything. And it's easier for the grader to grade your homework. All right, so imagine that you want to compute the max between two numbers. For example, I have the number x equal to 10, and then I have the number y equal to 17. Or let's say that I have the number z equal to -8. So we want to see which one is the bigger one. And then you know the logical statements, right? That for doing that, you can use if statement. If, for example, x is bigger than y, and it's gonna return a 0 or 1 here, right? So this is a comparison statement. I'm asking if x is bigger than y. So if I have x equal to 10 here and then y equals to 17, if I say x bigger than y, it's gonna return something like a logical Boolean for me. It's either 0 or 1. So 0 is for false, 1 is for true. Um, all right. So if there is the 1 as the output of this statement, I wanted to display x is the max. Else, I want to display y is the max. And you always end your statement with end, right? So if I run that program, it's going to say that y is the maximum. So if I have -17 and 10, x is going to be the max, right? So imagine that I have another number here, like z and y. So if I want to do that comparison, I should repeat this code again and then have it here. Like if z is bigger than y, then say z is the max, otherwise show that y is the max number, right? And for comparing z and x, you should again repeat the same thing here. So I should have x and z. So if x is the max, or if z if is the maximum number, right? So what you're doing basically is that you are copy pasting the same logic, the same functionality over and over again. This is redundant. This is not the perfect way of coding things. So one way that you can automate this task is to define functions. So I'm gonna like write a function that is going to compute the maximum between two values. So how we can write functions? So there are two concepts. We have function handles and functions in general. So today I'm going to talk about functions. So for writing a function in MATLAB, you usually have, I'm going to comment those lines. You have the function, you're going to set the output, and then you're going to have the name of the function name, and we are going to have the inputs here. All right. So that's how we define a function in MATLAB. So usually you can add like an end. This is like optional for you if you want to add an end or not. If you have your function defined within your script, you should have that definitely. But like if you are defining it in a separate file, it's optional to have that end or not. And in here, you're going to have like the code or something that you want to do. For this case, is computing the max. There are some notes that I want to make here before doing an example. And the first one is that usually this is like a really common mistake that for beginners happens. I get that a lot from my students, office hours and everything. And it's for the time that it says that I cannot find your function, or there's a mismatch between the function name and function call, function file, or you cannot have the name as, you cannot name the script as the name of the function. So let me have this here, that this is like a really important note, that the function name is recommended actually to be the same as the function file name in MATLAB. When you call a function, you are technically calling by function name. So let's see what happens. So if I have edit here, so let me just reset. Okay, so if I edit max of 2 dot m, I'm gonna have a function, the output is the max and the name is max of 2, and then I'm gonna have two values, x and y. And I'm gonna say if x is bigger than y, then max gonna be x, else max is y. Right? And you always have end for if statements. All right. So here, you notice that the name of my function is the same as the name of the file, right? So now when I call that function, max of 2 of 10 and 11, it's gonna call this function by its name. So I'm gonna do something to make that clear for you. So if I change the name of that function, something like dog food, or since I'm a cat person, cat food. So now let's see what happens. Like the max of 3 and 4, it doesn't know that function anymore. It doesn't know that there is a function called max of 2. And you get this warning here in MATLAB. So if you look at that, it says that the function name is known to MATLAB by its file name. So it's actually give you the warning that if you want to use that function, you should call it by the function name, like the file name here, right? So now if I do cat food and pass 3 and 4, it works. So this is crazy. This is not like in a standard way of programming, right? So if you have a function defined in a separate file, always have the name of that function the same as the function. All right. So max of 2. So I'm gonna have that in the common mistakes part. Not naming the function name and file the same. All right. The other common mistake is that you call your function inside the function file. So students always do that. Like I promise that you guys are gonna do that too, because it's extremely common because you want to check your function, right? Once you write the function, you want to check it. So I usually see something like, let's say a equals to 10. So for now, I define different variable names, and 12. And then they're going to say C equals to max of 2 of A and B, and then display C. So you see, you already get the error. You already get the red line here. So what's the error? Is that now this whole thing here, this max of 2 file, this is not a function file anymore. It converts to a script. So now it's like exactly like this script that I'm writing over here, right? And then you cannot have the script name the same as your function name. So now if I change that like to max of 2 font, now I'm okay. I don't get that error anymore. Right? And I get the result as 12. So first of all, it's recommended to have your function file name the same as your function name. Second of all, don't test or call your function inside your function file. And third of all, if you want to do it, make sure that the name of that script, because now you have a script, you don't have a function file, is different from your function. Those are really common mistakes that the students do all the time. All right, is there any questions so far? All right, so let's move on to the next topic. All right, so I guess that's what you need the most for your homework for this week. So now that I told you everything about functions, I guess we are ready to get deep dive into that. But before that, let me get everything back to what it should be. So you see the name of that file is the same as the function name. And now here I can call that. I can call, let's say just display max of 2 of 3 and 4, for example. And it's 4. Or I guess we already defined x and y. So you notice something here. I already told you about like having details in this like window here. So if you have two person sign together, like it should be attached together. If I have like in a space in between, it's not gonna work. It's gonna have sections for your script. So this is like a, and then you can do run section. So if I run that section, it's just gonna do all the clear and cleaning stuff for me. If I do this part, it's not gonna do the clear part, it's just gonna run the code for this section. It's just gonna make sections of your script. It's more readable, it's prettier, and it gives you the chance to run different part of your script. Like if you don't want to lose all your works, all your variables in workspace, so you want to skip, for example, this line, then you make this section and do that. All right. So you see, I created my function here and I'm calling it in a different script. Some notes about functions is that you can have multiple input, you can have multiple output, you can get multiple input and multiple output of your function. So let's see, for example, let's do some scenario when you want to get like multiple outputs. Um, Let me think about an example. I guess I already have a file for, yeah, I defined something that can, yeah, it can guide me through what I'm gonna say here. Okay, so you know that something like that easy, like max of two numbers and stuff like that, they are already defined in MATLAB, and then they are defined for matrices and vectors and stuff like that. So in the previous discussion section, we learned about vectors, matrices, and then they are basically arrays, right? And we said that everything in MATLAB is an array. Like if you define, for example, a equals to 8, and then you look at it, it's like a 1 by 1 double, right? So it's a array. It's considered to be like a 1 by 1 matrix or something like that. So let's see if we want to have like a function that can give us multiple output, multiple information about a vector or a matrix, like the maximum number, the minimum number, the average of that, the standard deviation, like some statistical information about the vector or like a matrix. So we learned that, I'm just going to do a quick review, that we can define a row vector by having something like v, 2, 3, 4, 9, for example. So this is a vector. If you look at it, it's going to say that it's 1 by 4. Or we can have a column vector by separating the rows with the semicolon. So if I do that now, v is a 4 by 1 double. We learned about the range notation for creating a vector. So if I do x equals to 1, 2 to 9, I'm creating all the odd numbers from 1 to 9. If I don't have the step size defined, then I'm going to have like the step size of 1. And I'm going to get all the numbers from 1 to 9. Then yeah, there is something new that I want to teach today, and it's going to be the linear space, which is the equally spaced points in an interval. So the way that it works is that I'm going to say vector v is the linear space. So linear spacing from 0 to 1, and I'm gonna have 5 points exactly. I have a typo here. Sorry, it should be lean space. Yeah, so 0, 0.5, you see I get like 5 points. So that's another way of getting vectors, right? So let me actually see if I can show you that PDF. It's in another window. Finder, download, should be version page 2 handout, and let me open it with preview. Open it. All right. It's not gonna get smaller than that. Okay. Yeah, and then we talked about creating matrices. Then you can get like separate your rows like that. This is gonna give you a 2 by 3 matrix. This one is going to give you like a 3 by 2 matrix. And then now I'm gonna talk about two new notations, I and zeros. So if I say I of 2 and 3, it's gonna give me the identity matrix. So you see this is not like well defined for a non-square matrix, because for identity we usually have the diagonal elements to be 1, but for this one, because there is no diagonal element on this column, so we're just going to make these two 1. So usually you use that for a square matrix like that, so the diagonal elements are 1. I guess you have ones actually, so for 4 and 3, I'm going to get a 4 by 3 matrix where you have all the elements as 1, and then we have zeros matrix, when I'm just gonna, most of the time, we are going to use this a lot when we want to initialize a matrix, right? So if I say 4 by 5, I'm gonna get a 4 by 5 matrix where all the elements are 0. So we also talked about the indexing, and yeah, so this is like the first row, first column that we learned how to access all those elements. And now let's see how we can write a function that, for example, gives us the mean of a function, the max of the function, the mean and max of a matrix. So I'm gonna have a function. Let's do it different this time. So let's right click here, new, and then we have the function. I'm gonna call that mat stat. You're gonna get some statistical info of a matrix. So it's gonna open up a template for you, right? So you have the output argument 1 and 2. So by default, the template has 2 outputs and gets 2 input. And it's just gonna assign the input and output together. So I'm gonna change that for what I wanna have here. So instead of 2 arguments, I'm gonna get 1 matrix, right? Let's have the matrix with the capital alphabet M. And let's say that we want to return the mean and the max. By the other mean, I mean the average. I guess that's good for now. And there is one thing that I want to show you, is that you see the comments that we by default have on the under the definition of the function, is that it's gonna give information to the user. So if you remember, last discussion section, I talked about the help function. So if you have help and then we used it for format, right? So it gives us information about what is the format function do, some examples, what are like the outputs that you can get. So if you do format long, for example, then you could see pi with like 16 digits and stuff like that. The help is actually going to read the comments that you have for your function. So if here, I'm going to say max, and it's usually like that, I guess, like the function with the capital name, and it's like attached to this person sign, computes the maximum between two numbers. Sorry, it's not supposed to run it. So now if I do help max of 2, you see it's gonna print out the information that I added as a comment here. So that's one thing. It's like a professional way of writing the functions in MATLAB. So we are going to have that here, like mat stat returns the statistical information of matrix F. And a detailed explanation, because this is not that complicated. I'm going to remove that. Of a matrix M. All right, so let's see what we want to do here. So imagine that there is the other very useful term that you can use sometimes for testing your stuff. And it's like creating a random numbers for your matrix. So there is this randi, I don't know the best way to pronounce that. And you're gonna pass the interval and the size of your matrix, and then it's gonna return a matrix of random integers in that interval. For example, look at that here. So the notation is that you have the randy. For the first, you're gonna pass the interval inside two brackets and the size of a matrix. So you usually pass two numbers, right? Number of rows and number of columns. So if I do randy of -2, 2, 2, and I'm gonna get a 3 by 4 matrix. So it gives me a 3 by 4 matrix that the values are integers from -2 to 2 included. So it's gonna include -2 and 2 in the interval. All right, so imagine that I created that matrix and I'm gonna assign that. Let me do a CLC first. All right, and I'm gonna assign that to matrix M. So I create a matrix M. It's a 3 by 4 matrix. It gives me, each time it's gonna produce new results for you. Random numbers from -2 and 2. And then I want to use the built-in functions in MATLAB. So there is a function in MATLAB called max. So if I say max of 3 and 6, it's going to return that for me. So let's see how that max works on matrices. So if I compute the max from -3 with 2 steps to 3. So I have all the odd numbers from -3 to 3, right? That's my vector here. And I'm going to compute the max of that. It's going to print out 3. So it always returns a single value for vectors and comparing scalars, right? So this means that I'm doing, so sorry. So I'm gonna compute the max of those, right? So I should do something like that, right? It's exactly the same as saying it this way. It's just cleaner version than that. Or like max of all these numbers, like -3, -1, 1. Yeah, the same that you compare 5 and 6. Yeah, this is not allowed to do. So if you want to like compute more than 2 max, so if you do -3 and 4, this is allowed. You can have either two single, like two scalars, or you should pass it as a vector. So you compute the max. Either this way or either that way, or you design other. All right, so for the matrix M, if I call the max on the whole matrix, what's that? What do you think is the result? Why am I getting 4 values here? Any ideas? Um, like, yeah, that's funny because by accident it happens here. But so let me change matrix M. So hopefully this time is more obvious. Like -10 to 8. So now see what happens. Now if I call the max of M, it's 4, 2, 3, 5. What's that? That's the maximum among each column, right? So what's going to happen is that it's going to consider the first one as the first column as one vector, return the max. The second one, so it's going to treat each column as separate vectors and return the max of those. So if I want to compute the max on the whole matrix, I want to compute the maximum among all rows, all columns. So in that case, what's the max of this matrix? Is 5, right? I just want to return 5. So 5 is here, 4, 2, 3. Now I can do another max. So another max of F. So now I get 5. Is that clear? So when you call max on a matrix, it's going to first compute the max of each column. So you should repeat it another time to get the final maximum number. And that's exactly the same for mean, I guess. But we can check it here. So this is fine. This is matrix M. So let's do mean. It's exactly the same. 2 minus 7 minus 10 minus 10. So if I repeat that, if I take the mean of M, it should return -10 for me now, right? All right. So let's say that, and I'm not sure about the mean. So let me see. Mean of M. Does that work? Yeah, so it's gonna take the mean of each column. So in that case, it's better to have like a for loop to compute it yourself. So just a quick question. Did you learn about for loops yet or not? Did Dr. Moles teach you about for loops or not? Oh, okay. All right. So if you already know about that, so before saying that, I just wanted to give you this. It always like when I want to talk about for loops and stuff like that, it always reminds me of decision that I had when I was like 16 or 15 years old and I wanted to do programming for the first time. And then the instructor said that if you know three concepts, you can code anything. So he said logical statements or comparison statements, control flow, and automation with functions. He said that you can do anything that you want. So you already can code anything that you want. So you know all the basic ingredients. Other stuff is just like fancy thing that we just like do it together. So if you know how to use comparison statement, if, else, and stuff like that, the Boolean operators, Boolean values, logical operations. If you know the control flow for loops, while loops, and now that you learn about functions, you can code anything. It's always fun to mention that for students because this is the first thing that I remember from learning programming for the first time. All right, so let's see how we can compute the mean. So mean is the summation of all the elements divided by the number, right? So let's do something fun here. So you know that I already told you that if you call the function size on a matrix, it's gonna return two values, the number of rows and the number of columns. Size is actually a function that has two outputs, right? So like here we have three outputs inside brackets. It's exactly the same as what we have in size as a function. So if I define two brackets and I'm gonna say I'm gonna assign the first output to num rows and num columns and call the size m. Okay, you're welcome. So num rows and num columns, it's gonna like assign 3 to this value and 4 to the other one. So let's do that here too. So num rows, num columns. So if I know the number of rows and I know the number of columns, I know the size of a matrix, right? So if it's 3 by 4, it means that it has 12 elements, right? And I want to compute the mean among all those 12 elements. So let's do it. It's easy and fun. So for an index starting from 1 to indexing from 1 to number of elements. So from 1, what's the number of elements? It's num columns multiplied by num rows. I'm gonna sum. So I'm gonna create a variable sum here, set it to 0. And each time I'm gonna add the element and that index and update sum. So if you didn't get it, I'm gonna explain it in a second. So what I'm doing here is that I'm creating a variable sum and it's first 0, and then I'm gonna loop through all the elements of matrix M, right? And I'm gonna sum all these elements, 2 plus minus 3 plus 3 plus minus 10 plus 4. So how I do that, I have 12 elements, so I go from 1 to 12, 3 by 4, which is 12, and I'm gonna add 2. So at first, I guess you already know this. So sum is 0. Then I'm gonna have sum to be the previous sum, which was 0 plus 2. And then I'm gonna have the previous sum plus the new element, which was minus 3, right? So it's just gonna, each time I'm gonna update the sum with the new element. That's what I do by this state. So once I'm done with that, now that I sum up everything, so mean is just the sum divided by all elements, which is again num rows times num columns. So you learn multiple things here. You learn that you can get the multiple outputs out of a function. You just did like size of n before. You know that if you do that, you get two values here. Now you're assigning those two values into two different variables. You use them to compute the length or the full number of elements of a matrix. And then you can compute the mean of that using for loops without using any built-in function. All right, so we learned that for a mean of a matrix, you can call the mean function twice. You can call the max function twice. All right. So there is one thing that you may already notice, that because the mean is a function in MATLAB and mean is a variable here, right? So it's kind of like confusing. By mean, I mean the minimum variable, minimum element of matrix M, but we have a function defined as mean in MATLAB. So it's better to have like a different name here. Mean L, max L. So now we are fine. So now I have different names. Maximum elements, minimum elements, and I use that. All right, so we computed everything. So now I can call that function here. I guess we can call that MATLAB on M. So what happens is that because we have more than two outputs, it's just going to return the first one. That's another note that you've learned a lot of stuff today. So that's another thing to note here, that it just returned the first output. If you want to get all three outputs, you should define that yourself. So mean out, max out, mean out, and mat stat on M. So now I have the minimum as -10, max as 5, and mean as -2. Right? All right. So I guess you learned everything for functions. Is there anything else? Yeah, there is one other thing that is pretty fun to do sometimes. So imagine that I just wanted to know the mean, the average, and the minimum value. I didn't want to know the max. So I could just use that symbol there. The hat or tilde, yeah. So tilde, and then you see, I just skip to get that output. I just get these two out. Or I can just skip to get these two and just get the output. For example, like for number of rows and column, I can say that, and then I'm just going to get the number of columns by calling size. Right? Or I could just get the number of rows and skip the number of columns. So if you want to skip getting an output, you can use tilde. So let me do a final review to prevent confusion on this section. So we learned about resetting, that if you run that section, everything is going to be, if I just run that section, yeah, the workspace is clean, the command window is clean. Now, if I ask for the matrix M, it doesn't recognize it because it's not any more available in the memory. Then we learned that using functions, we can make automation, we can make stuff easier, we can prevent doing copy pasting and redundant code. And we learned the syntax to write a function in MATLAB, that we should have the keyword function output. If you have more than one output, you learn that you should have it inside brackets. Then we learned that the function name should be the same as the function file name, because MATLAB called the function by its function file name. And we did learn about the documentation of a function, that if you have the comment under a function, that's going to appear when you get help. So if I say help mathstat, it's going to give me the information related to that function. And that can happen for your user-defined function or the built-in functions that are already in MATLAB. Then we learned about the common mistakes using functions. Then we learned about to use the template function in MATLAB by right-clicking here, new, and then having a function. And then we learned about an example of control flow using for loops. We indexed through all the elements of a matrix, computed the mean. We learned about the application of min and max functions in MATLAB and how to use them on matrices. We learned about some useful functions like I, zeros, ones, randi, and all this stuff. We learned about how to get multiple output of the function. And if we want to skip it, we can use a command to avoid that. So I guess that's the end of the discussion section today. I'm happy to help if you have any questions or concerns. Otherwise, we can end this session. Have a good one.